Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Tatiana Kravchuk. I am a partnership specialist with the U.S. Census Bureau. And really, that just means that I work with the communities to try to encourage trusted messengers, people who have kind of an influence to spread the message that the census is safe, easy, and important. And today, thank you very much to Heriberto and everyone at Twin Rivers for allowing us this opportunity. I would like to talk about why the census is important and what we kind of already know about the census. So it's kind of a weird year. 2020, a lot has been happening, and most of you should already have either filled out the census or received the paper questionnaire by now. So I think some of this information you may have seen or heard, but I want you to be sure that you have the most correct and verified information, because we're going to go through a couple of myths and some things that people say about the census that isn't true, and I want you to have the most accurate information. So first, what is the census and how often does it happen? A census is simply a count of the population. We count everyone living in the United States, and it's mandated in the Constitution. The Constitution tells us that we have to do this every 10 years. Something important that happens as a result of the census is that our federal government determines how we distribute our money. So simply put, we pay taxes. The taxes go to Washington, D.C., and then there's this big pie of money, and they have to decide how to distribute it to the states. And they can't do it evenly because there's different amounts of people living in all the states. So California is super populated, so it should make sense that California would get more money than Montana, that doesn't have as much people living there. So it's about $800 billion that get distributed to the states based on population. It also determines representation in Congress. So currently California has it has exactly 53 seats in Congress, and it's determined on population. So this year we can stand to lose a seat, but hopefully everyone fills out the census and we gain some seats. And it also, the census helps us make decisions about our communities, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. So there are a few hard to count communities. The census looks at certain communities traditionally that have been historically undercounted for a variety of reasons. The community that is hardest to count, or that is historically the most undercounted, is actually young children. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But other communities that are undercounted are racial or ethnic minorities, non-English speakers, low-income persons, people experiencing homelessness, immigrants, undocumented immigrants, LGBT, anyone who has a distrust of the government. A little bit about me. My family immigrated to the United States when I was 4. We came here from Ukraine, and we were escaping a communist regime that did not allow us to flourish in that community. My parents were not able to get jobs or go to school. And luckily for us, the United States accepted us as refugees. But what happened as a result of hundreds of years of growing up in a very oppressive regime in that country is that we brought all of our fears with us. So I've shared this story before. My grandmother, who is now 82 years old, she still thinks that people are listening to her phone calls. She's very afraid of sharing information. She has a really large garden, and sometimes they sell like cucumbers or tomatoes from their garden, and she's always afraid that she's going to get in trouble from somebody, because that's how she lived, and that's the kind of government that she was used to in Ukraine. You can't change 60 years of living under one type of government, moving over here and changing the mindset. So we understand that people have fear and a distrust of the government, but I just want to go over some of that with you today of why you should not fear. But it's understandable that there are communities that have this fear. Other communities that are undercounted are people with disabilities or living in non-traditional housing. And we're going to talk about that as well. So why do we talk about communities that are undercounted, and why do we say that we really want you to fill out the census? Is really because of the money that we stand to lose. Our communities stand to lose not just a few $1,000s, it's billions of dollars if we don't fill out the census. The 2010 census, it's estimated that it failed to count 1.5 million California residents. So that means that we lost over $3 billion in funding that would otherwise go to California. So if you divide that up by people living in California, it equates to about $2,000 a person a year. So $2,000, the census happens every 10 years. So 2 times 10, that's about $20,000 a person. So if in my family, I have 4 children and a husband, so that's 6 people. So 6 times 2, 12, and then multiply that by 10 years. So $120,000 that my family either would contribute to the community by filling out the census, or we would have a loss of that funding if my family didn't fill it out. Next slide. Oh, thank you. So if you look at all what's at stake of all of the programs that receive this funding, it's actually programs that are super important to our communities. When my family immigrated to the United States, we had nothing. We came with a piece of luggage each. We literally brought our pillows and blankets because we had nothing when we came here. We didn't know what to expect. And we were so fortunate to be able to receive Medicaid and food stamps and Section 8 housing and free health insurance. My mom had WIC. We had free and reduced lunch when we were in school. We received, I remember, Christmas presents from the Salvation Army and lots of other things that we didn't know who was paying for it. We didn't know how we were getting it, but that's how our family survived. And I know it's true for a lot of the communities. My kids actually go to Twin Rivers School District, and I can see all of these communities taking part in these programs. And that's a lot to lose. So if my family didn't contribute that 100, it's not contributing, but by filling out the census, my family brings 120,000 to the community. That's a lot of money that could be helping people with, the food stamps and cash assistance. For Section 8 housing, the government uses data from the census to project the need. So right now we have a housing crisis in California. We just don't have enough rent that is affordable, just affordable housing. And when you fill out the census, the government knows, how many people are living in a certain area and what type of rental needs they have. Just like schools or hospitals, this money goes to communities that have more people. So when we have more people living in Sacramento, for example, and we are constantly driving on the roads, and we have more people going to the emergency room or to schools, we need to know to plan for that. So if our emergency rooms are filled and you have a 3-hour wait, that's not great. So we need to do better. Maybe we need to build more houses. And when we have more children, we need to make sure that there's room for them at the local school, that we don't have to drive half an hour out of our way to another city, that we have enough schools in the neighborhoods that we live in. So when we are filling out the census, we are simply informing the future of what's happening. And for these programs, ones that are so important to our community, that's a lot of money. So it's about $75 billion that are covering all of these programs that are going to California. And we really need that funding. So I definitely encourage you to fill out the census, if not for any reason, then because you or someone you know benefits from these programs. And now let's talk about children. Why are children being missed on the census? I mentioned before that children, especially children ages 0 to 5, are the most undercounted group on the census. And it kind of makes sense. Sometimes we just don't understand why we're filling out the census. We're thinking, oh, it's kind of like taxes or some other kind of document. It could just be a simple misunderstanding. Maybe it was a newborn. So we use April 1st as census day. That's the benchmark census day. If someone was born on or before April 1st, they get counted in the census. If someone passed away after April 1st, they actually still get counted because they were still alive on April 1st. So you have to have that cutoff somewhere, and April 1st is that cutoff for the government. Kids that live with grandparents or other relatives, people might be confused about who gets to count them. People living in complex households, maybe roommates and kids. So if you have 4 roommates and they all have kids, just confused about who's doing the counting. And of course, there's that fear that I talked about, fear of being reported to ICE or IRS, landlord, CalWorks. Maybe you are in a Section 8 housing, or maybe you have, you're only supposed to have, 4 people living in your home, but you actually have 10. And you fear that if you fill out that the census and you mark that you have 10 people living there, that we're going to report that information to your landlord or to your housing program. And that's simply not true, but that is what people fear. And many of these households, they complete the census, they just don't count the children. They just think that they do, fill out the adults and that's it. So all of these reasons are some of the reasons why children are missed. But this year's questionnaire is worded a little bit differently. So we hope that people understand that they need to count kids. But if nothing else, please just take this information home and share it with your neighbors and family, that it is really important to include the children, because of so many programs are impacted by funding that is lost if we don't count the children, including, schools. So free and reduced lunch and after school programs and childcare. We want to make sure that we have those resources for our families. So we want to make sure that we count our kids. In Sacramento, we've received, we've lost over $100 million in federal funding due to the 2010 undercount. So that's a lot of money that, we would really benefit from. I know daycare is so expensive. I mentioned I have 4 kids, so having to pay for daycare hurts. And having programs like Child Action and Beanstalk that are funded by the government, and they help out a lot. So if you're a working parent and you have kids in daycare, or Head Start, that is so important. So again, super, super important to count kids. And now we're going to go over the census. What does it look like, and why are we even filling it out in the first place? So I mentioned to you guys confidentiality earlier, and kind of the story about my grandmother and her fear. And I really understand that. I don't like to share. I work for the government, and I feel like I don't like to share that much information with the government. But the Census Bureau has one of the strictest confidentiality policies in all of government, and we do not violate that. We will absolutely not share your information with anybody else, with any government agency, with any office of government. So that means it could be your local government, and it goes all the way up to the president. When President Truman was in office, his house flooded, and he needed to move very quickly. And he petitioned the Census Bureau to give him information about a neighborhood that he was considering moving into. And the Census Bureau said, no, it doesn't matter that you're the president of the United States and you kind of want to make sure it's a safe neighborhood. We cannot share information with you. It doesn't matter that you're the president. And I know right now, during this current administration, there's just a lot of fear, especially in the immigrant community, in the undocumented community. Within the Slavic community, Russian, Ukrainian, we have a lot of undocumented immigrants as well. So it's not only one country that they're coming from and undocumented, or just the Latinx community. It's Eastern European and other countries. We have a lot of that fear too. And I just want to let you know that the US Census Bureau does not share information with ICE, with your landlord, with IRS, with anybody, with local law enforcement. You are not going to get a raid all of a sudden because the Census Bureau is sharing information. We keep that information private. We only share it in statistical format. So we'll say that there are 100,000 people living in, a certain city, or there are, I don't know, 500 people between the ages of 50 and 60, but we're not going to say that Tanya Kravchuk lives on 123 Main Street. Your information is going to be kept private. And every single census employee takes a lifetime oath. For the rest of my life, if I never work for the Census Bureau again, I will have to protect information that I gather or hear while I'm working for the census. And it has some pretty strict fines and jail time. So I don't want to risk that. And Title 13 of the US Code is where you can find information of how your confidentiality is protected. So if you want more information, you can look it up, but I can tell you right now, the Census Bureau takes it so seriously. I have never worked in a job where it takes me like 15 minutes to log on to my computer to verify my information. I put in a chip card. Every like 15 days, my password changes. I can't send emails with even a person's full name and last name because that's too much information. I mean, it's pretty intense. And I can just tell you personally, from having just worked here and witnessed it, we take it very seriously. So this timeline was accurate until COVID happened. So census days still remain the same. It was April 1st. And there's these other operations that we do concurrently with self-response. So when we tell you to fill out the census, we call that period self-response. It's you responding for yourself, for your family. And but there are other operations. So if you look past the census day where it talks about group quarters or service-based, those dates are now postponed, but they're still happening. And that's how we count like hospitals, nursing homes, prisons, anybody that's living together that's receiving a common service, but not typically unrelated. So those are like the bigger group quarters, like dorms at colleges or jails. And we thought that we would be doing non-response follow-up in about May through August. It's now going through October. So the last day that you can respond is October 31st, so Halloween. And that's also the same time that an enumerator can knock on your door. So let me just say this right now. We had a pretty strict time where you could respond online or by phone or by the questionnaire. And if you did that by the end of April, then nobody would be knocking on your door. And I always encourage someone to respond, to self-respond, so that no one is coming to your house. If you're afraid, if you don't want to open the door, if you are immunocompromised, and impacted by COVID, and you just don't want to talk to anyone, that's totally fine. Fill out the census. But what was happening now is because of COVID and because this timeline has kind of collapsed on itself, even if you respond, you may still get a phone call or a knock on your door. So just be aware that this could happen because we're kind of communicating together. And you can either not open the door, or you can open the door and tell them, or pick up the phone and tell them you've already submitted your census. I'm kind of going to circle back to this. I think I may have been a bit confusing, so I'll circle back to it in another slide. These are some of the different diverse living situations that I talked about that the Census Bureau will collect information: the nursing homes, military bases, hospitals. It typically doesn't affect most of you unless you have a college student that lived in a dorm and is now home due to COVID and the school closures. So if that is the case, they actually get counted at the college because it's considered a group quarter. So if any of you have that situation, you can write in a question and Heriberto will tell me to talk more about that. But otherwise, we're just going to zoom through this because most of it doesn't apply to you. Oh, you know what? One second. If you can go back. One thing I will highlight here is that if you're confused about where you should get counted, the kind of rule of thumb is where you live or stay most of the time. So if you have a home that you live in most of the time, that's where you get counted. People get confused, like if they're on vacation and they get the census, or if you know, maybe they were renting and so they lived in I don't know, in an apartment for 3 months and then in a different apartment for 9 months. Where do they get counted? They get counted at the residence where either where they're living on April 1st, if it's already the new I'm going to confuse you. Let's just say where you live or stay most of the time. If you don't have a usual home, if you are sleeping on somebody's couch, if you are experiencing homelessness, if you're living in a campground, then you get counted where you were on census day, which is April 1st. So try to remember where that was and get counted there. And when I say get counted, it means that that's the address that you use on the census. So how do you take the survey? I've already kind of gone over this. We ask everyone to go online. That's by far the easiest way. And online means any screen that gets you to the internet. And that is going to be my2020census.gov, my2020census.gov. And it is available in these 13 languages. So English plus 12 non-English languages. And then there's also some additional language guides and glossaries if you speak a different language, and you can identify that on the website. You can also call in over the phone for the non-English languages. You get directly, you're talking to a live person. I mean, the English one as well, but it just makes a difference sometimes when you're calling and it's automated and you have a lot of questions to answer, especially having a native language that is not English. So if you have a different language, it's pretty easy. You're talking to a live person. And a lot of people find that that's the best way for them, is to do it over the phone, because you kind of have that flexibility. If you don't understand something, you can ask the person and they can explain it to you. By now, everyone should have received a print paper questionnaire if they haven't filled out the census yet. Our hope was that everyone would respond online or over the phone, and then after a series of reminders, they would be mailed a questionnaire. But by now, you should have received it. And if you live in a neighborhood that has a high percentage of Spanish speakers, then you probably received it in Spanish. The questionnaire assistance kiosks are not operating right now because of COVID, but if you do have questions, I would suggest calling the phone numbers for the language assistance, and then they can help route you. If they can't answer your question, then they will route you to another person that can.
Ms. Kravchuk, there's a question that ties into the survey.
Sure.
Was that in some cases, some of the families did not receive the form with the number, the code by mail. What could they do in that case?
Thank you for addressing that. So I totally just jumped right over that. So yes, there is this code on the census, and we ask for ID, and it is helpful for us if you use the ID to fill it out, because it's geocoded to where you live, and it simply makes the kind of information scrubbing easier for us. But you don't have to have the code. So if you go to my2020census.gov and you want to fill out your census, you simply state that you don't have the ID and you want to fill it out using your address, and you just put in your address and you can fill it out that way. And then if you don't have an address, if you are experiencing homelessness, you simply state, I don't have an address. And then it will ask you kind of a few other questions, but you can do that as well. So some of the questions that are on there, number of people living in your household, additional people, if you own or rent your home, and your phone number. We do encourage that you put your phone number, because if a census employee has questions, they can just call you instead of coming to your home, and most people don't want anyone knocking on their home. The additional people, this is where you guys decide. So if you are renting, if you have multiple people that are unrelated living in the house, you can either decide one person is going to fill it out for everyone, or every person can fill it out for themselves using that the address. So when they go online, instead of everyone filling out the code can only be used once. They just put in their address. So one person, the main, the person on the lease or head of household, however you want to call it, they can use that ID. And then everyone else living in there, if they want to fill it out separately, they simply use the address and fill it out. Or, there could be someone that's living there some of the time. You can have had a guest, you could have had someone house or couch surfing, or a college student. So that's the additional people. You write in anyone who was living there some of the time, so the Census Bureau can figure out where that person should get counted. We also go through the personal information, so your name, your sex, your age and birthday, so we can verify. Do you have Hispanic or Latino origin, and your race? So all of these, your sex and your race, they are self-identifying questions. We don't ask that you attach a birth certificate or a marriage certificate or anything that kind of, there's no documentation that follows. So I have a kind of a problem, not a problem, a hard time with the race sometimes. I know a lot of people don't quite know where they fit. So you just pick the answer that you feel is correct for you. And then for the additional people living there, that's the same thing. You go through those same questions for those people. I get asked a lot, what happens if you don't want to fill out a question, or if you leave a question blank? As a census employee, I have to say we encourage you to fill out every single question. If you don't fill out every single question, it might prompt a census worker coming to your door. As a immigrant and a community member, I will tell you that a lot of people just don't feel comfortable filling out certain information. And if you want, some information is better than no information. So if you want to fill it out and leave certain things blank on the internet, you just keep pressing next. It will look like it won't let you continue, but if you just press next one more time, it will go to the next screen. So you can just skip over it. Again, I highly encourage you to fill out all the information, but I also understand if there's something that you want to leave blank because you feel it's too personal, that is your choice.
Another question, Ms. Kravchuk, or for families, a lot of families that live in Phonobers area, they tend to be doubled up in an apartment or in a house. How do we go as far as those families that are doubled up and living in an apartment, or multi-families in that case?
So you decide how you would like to do it, whether you want one person to fill out the census on behalf of everyone and they just go and collect everyone's, like age and birthday and all of that information, or if every smaller group, some kind of subset, fills it out for themselves. Some people prefer to do it in their own little family unit because it's just easier. It took me about probably a total of 8 minutes to fill it out for my whole family. I knew everyone's information. If you have to collect information, then, make sure you write it down and you have it handy. If you're doing it over the internet, it will time out after 15 minutes if you haven't done something, if you're not typing or moving the mouse. So if you're idle for 15 minutes, it will just exit out of the screen and you will have lost all of that information. There's not a way to save it. So make sure that if you're filling it out for everyone that's living in that home, that you have that information handy. Otherwise, all of the individual family units, you can fill it out for yourself using all of the same methods. You can go online, you can call in over the phone, And you can, if you get a print questionnaire, you can fill that out. But again, online is the easiest. If you mess something up when you're typing, you can just backspace, adjust it. So I would encourage you to go to my2020census.gov and fill it out using your address. So for every family unit living there, you would just simply use my address and then continue with the census. Does that make sense? Awesome. I think it's important to talk about what the census does not ask for, especially in the immigrant community or some communities who just have heightened fear. I want you to know that the Census Bureau does not ask for your social security number, your credit card or bank information. It absolutely does not ask for money. It doesn't ask for your ID. It doesn't ask for your citizenship status. A lot of people are very concerned about the citizenship status. There was chatter. Our president did want to put the citizenship question on the questionnaire. It is not there. The Census Bureau does not ask for your citizenship status. It does not ask for your religion or political party affiliation. No kind of identifying information like your mother's maiden name that is sometimes used to verify your identity, and nothing on behalf of a political party. So, I mean, the questions that we went over are very basic. This kind of stuff is people that are fishing. So if you see this kind of stuff, please report it to your local law enforcement. These are people that are not authorized by the Census Bureau to be going and doing this. During the time of the census, you are going to have scammers. You're going to see people exploiting the census for their own wants. And, we have seen this a lot, especially with the political parties and asking for donations. In the undocumented community, this could be people calling and asking for various information. If someone calls you with this, hang up and report it to the law enforcement. And again, if you don't want to, if this is someone coming to your door and asking you for this, you don't have to answer those questions right away. If you're uncomfortable, if you think, I'm not sure if this is a census employee, you can say, you know what, I can't talk to you today. I want to verify your information. Come back next week. And you can call the Census Bureau and you can get their name and call the Census Bureau and verify that they actually work for the Census Bureau, for the federal government. But even if they do, nobody should be asking you any of these questions. It's simply not on the survey. Why do we want to get counted, and how does being counted help children and families thrive? We get better and stronger political representation. We get more funding for key programs that serve our kids and families. And it's a more equitable distribution of funds. We don't want one state to get more money because they have more land, or in another state to get more money because they're closer to Washington, D.C. There has to be an equitable way of distributing this funding. And the thing that makes most sense is population. So where you live, the more people that you have living in an area, the more traffic you have on the roads, the more kids you have going to school, the more use you have of that hospital. So it just makes sense for that funding to follow. We also plan better for the future. We want to know where we are expanding our stores and businesses. Do we need to build another Walmart? Do we need more grocery stores in that area? If it looks like a lot of people if there's a residential community, but there's no grocery stores within walking distance or even driving distance sometime, then it's not a good community. So we want to plan better for the future. And we want better information on our kids' well-being and of the services that they require to thrive. We want stronger advocacy and people that are fighting on our behalf for the things and services that we need. So all of this together, it helps our children thrive. And one thing that you can do to help your family and help your children is to fill out the census. I've addressed some of the barriers, and now so about 35. I just want to go through some of them like a what if. So some of the barriers that you may experience. So if English is not your first language, it is now my first language, but I also speak Russian and Ukrainian. So if you need assistance in other languages, on the phone or online, you have 12 other languages. Spanish and Russian are one of the two languages that everything is kind of available in. And you can take the questionnaire in those languages. But if you speak another language and you don't have someone in your family that can translate for you, then there are these language and video guides available in 60 other languages online. Or when a enumerator comes to your door, when a census employee comes to your door, they will have like sheets of a sentence in a different language, and they will show it to you, and you can pick the language that you speak, and then we will get someone that speaks that language to come to your door and ask you the census questions in that language. However, if you have someone in your home, like I mentioned, I speak Russian and Ukrainian. I grew up translating for my parents. So when I went to kindergarten here, and I was translating for my mom, probably from the time that I was 5 or 6, I would go to the welfare office with her. I would talk to our landlord, and I would translate for her. So if you have a child or someone that is comprehends English and is able to translate for you, that's fine as well. But you can also get assistance over the phone. And there's also a printed guide in Braille and large print if for visually impaired or blind. If you don't want to fill out the questionnaire because you are an immigrant and you don't want the government to use information against you due to your immigration status, I understand you. I empathize with you. I just want to tell you again, the Census Bureau will not ask if you are a U.S. citizen, and it will not use your immigration status or that knowledge against you in any way. We're not going to share it with your landlord. We're not going to share it with ICE. We're not going to share it with your employer, with anyone else. We just keep that information and produce it in statistical format so we can make decisions about the future. But it is not your, you're living there or the people that are living there legally or illegally. It has no merit on the Census Bureau. So if you have 20 people living in a home that on paper it says you have 8 people living there, well, we just want to know how many schools do we need to plan, how many hospitals, how many roads, how much funding needs to go for these services in that area, because there are that many people living there. We want to distribute that funding and make better decisions about the future. It doesn't matter to the Census Bureau if you're there legally, illegally, or whatever, mixed status, documented, undocumented, it just doesn't matter. We just want to make better decisions about the future, and we will not share that information with anyone else. If you think that you don't have enough time to fill out the census, I mentioned it took me up to 8 minutes total to fill it out for a family of 6, and I did it online. You can do it over the phone. I have heard that there are kind of long wait times occasionally when you call over the phone. So if that's a problem, then again, I encourage you to do it online if you have access to the internet. Otherwise, even if it is an investment of 5 to 10 minutes, it's so important for the rest of the 10 years that we have until the next census. So take that 10 minutes now, because it's going to help you so much in resources and community services and funding over the next 10 years. We've touched on the impact. A lot of people just don't think it impacts them. I don't want to do the census. I don't know how this affects my life. My sister, who just had a baby recently, she's like, I don't want to do that. And I said, well, the next census is not for 10 years. So Adele is going to be 10 by the next census. That's 10 years that she that will be going to school. Don't you want her, to have room in kindergarten in the school that's near you that you want her to go to, and also be receiving all of the after school programs and the different kinds of services for schools in your area? And she said, yes, I do. So I think it's important to just figure out what it is about the census that impacts you in terms of money or services. I've talked about the health insurance, Medi-Cal, CalFresh, food stamps, and SNAP. That's a huge help to a lot of people in our community. WIC, the formula and milk and kind of groceries for kids 0 to 5. The school breakfast and lunch program, Head Start and early Head Start, huge help from parents and working parents. Childcare, special education. We need to make sure that we have the best education for all kinds of needs. Cash assistance, Section 8 housing, and this is just some of them. There's a whole other list of impacts. And personally, these are ones that impacted my life growing up, and some, to some extent, still impact my life. And so I know that it matters, that my filling out the census matters, and I know that it matters for your family too. But so just find what it is that impacts you, and if your friends, family, or neighbors are asking you, well, what is the census and why should I do it? Now you will have information to share with them about how it impacts them as well.
Ms. Crabtree, if, for example, if you could say, like, for a person that doesn't fill out the census, just one person, how much money would that be, just so they could tell their relatives or their friends that if you don't fill out the survey for yourself, or you don't fill it out for your child, then this is how much it would equate to for the next 10 years?
So if we kind of divide it all up, it's about $2,000 a person a year. So one person will bring about $20,000 to their community to these services, or these services will miss out on $20,000 if a person doesn't fill out the census. It's per person per year, so about $2,000 a person a year. For the multifamily household, we went over it earlier, but if you have more families, smaller units living in a larger unit, it's important to count everyone. It doesn't matter if they are listed on the lease or rental agreement, or if your landlord is unaware that they're living there. By law, the Census Bureau cannot and will not share that information. We just want to know how many people are there. So please fill it out. And like we had talked about earlier, either one person can do it for everyone, or each unit can fill it out for their own unit using the address option online, or calling and doing it over the phone. If you are homeless, you can indicate that too online and say that that you don't have an address, and it will basically kind of ask you for your street location of where you're camping or the shelter that you're staying at. But we still absolutely want to count you. You still absolutely matter, and we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to participate in the census. If you are temporarily staying with someone, make sure that they include you on their census. You have a voice, so ask them, hey, did you include me? And if you think they didn't, fill it out for yourself. This is kind of lastly, I want to encourage you to help the census by joining our team. The Census Bureau pays well. It's about, in Sacramento County, I think it's now up to $22 an hour, and it's very flexible. You don't even set a schedule. You just work the hours that you're available, and then you report those hours back. So you don't tell them ahead of time the hours you're going to work. You tell them at the end of the week which hours you worked. And they pay you weekly. They pay for your training. If you have to drive, they pay for mileage. They reimburse you for mileage or for like a bus ticket. But a lot of times I hear that people don't even have to drive. They just work in their community and they walk around their neighborhood. What this job mainly is that walking door to door and asking people to fill out the census. You will have a tablet, like an iPad, and you will do it electronically. If that worries you, know that you will have training, and you'll be absolutely equipped with everything that you need to start the job. A lot of people worry about like dogs or feeling unsafe. If there's a situation that you feel unsafe, you just skip over that, and then you talk with your supervisor about a plan for that house. You don't get paid for the amount of people that you speak to, you get paid by hour. So if you go to 20 homes on your list and none of them open the door for you, you still get paid because you still did your work, they just didn't want to open the door. So it's actually a really great job and a way that you can impact your community, because if you live there, chances are you know some of the people, the neighborhood is familiar to you, and the people will be more open to opening the door and talking with you. The application is available in Spanish, but I will say that if you do the application in Spanish, you will then have to do an English like proficiency test. So it's almost not worth it. If you can if you go on the website and if you are able to fill out the application in English, that is kind of the extent of how much English you need to know to do the job. Because if you speak another language, chances are they will send you to households that have that language need. So if, for example, Spanish is your language, most of the time you will be sent to households that need to talk to someone who speaks Spanish. You will still need to understand the training that's provided in English and the documents that you're handed in English. So when people ask, like, how much English do I need to know? If you can fill out this application, that's about how much English, then you'll know that, okay, I could do this job. And we're still hiring. It'll be about 8 weeks that you will work. It's pretty flexible. If at some time you say, nope, I have a full-time job that I just received, or I need to go do something else, you can quit at any time. I just highly encourage you to fill it out because it's great pay, flexible, and it's something that you're doing for your community that's going to make a difference.
And qualifications would be for
the qualifications are you are 18 and you must be 18. They do say U.S. citizen, but actually, if you are authorized to work in the United States, then you qualify for working for the census. You just have to be authorized. So undocumented, that's difficult, but like DACA or so if you have authorization to work, then you can apply to work for the Census Bureau. These are some scenarios that we could have gone over. I don't know, Heriberto, we have time for it? We kind of covered a lot of them.
we have time.
We have time. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if people want to maybe respond on the chat, but like here are some of the scenarios of people of why they don't want to, objections, or why they don't want to fill out the census. I don't want INS to have my information. Does anyone have thoughts about this, or other kinds of objections regarding this? And then I'll address it. Well, let me just launch into it. So INS will not have your information. The Census Bureau does not share it with any other government agency, and we will not share it with INS, with ICE, with IRS. If you haven't paid your taxes for a while and you're living in that home, we're not going to share that information with them. So in that regard, you are safe. We want to make better decisions for the future, better funding decisions for the future. So we want to know how many people live in the communities across the United States. And I can't say that I know exactly how you feel, but I do understand. My family came from a different country. We had very real concerns and fears that we lived with. We were used to not sharing certain information for the government because we knew that it would be used against us. I do understand that. Frequently what I tell immigrant communities and like my family, which I had to convince them to fill out the census. So I say, you trusted this country enough, you wanted to move here. You thought that this was a better country for your family. You came here for religious freedom, for educational freedom, for the opportunity to work, for various reasons. And you trusted this country to give that to you. Just continue in that trust and fill out the census so that the country can continue to run the way that it does. We have all of these social services. We have all of these programs available, but the only way that we can continue to fund them and make informed decisions is by knowing where the need is. If we don't know that you're there, we can't give you that funding for your community. It's kind of like, having a party, and you want to know how much people are coming to your party, because you have to plan. You have to buy enough food. You have to make sure that you have the drinks. If I'm having kids, I'm going to order cheese pizza, not combination. If I'm having older people, maybe I need to adjust, I don't know, sugar, or maybe for kids, sugar, whatever. But you're making decisions about for that party based on how many people are coming. It's kind of the most basic information. So we went over those questions. You saw it wasn't anything crazy. We're not asking for your citizenship status, your social security number, or ID number, anything like that. It's just simple information that you probably already gave Facebook and other social media accounts, or heck, even the pizza delivery guy. He has more information about you than you're filling out on the Census Bureau. So just know that your information is safe and it's important for your future and for your community. If you were in the hospital, I was in the hospital and my newborn was born on 4/1, your baby would absolutely be counted. If that baby was born after midnight on April 1st, unfortunately, it doesn't get counted. So we are now, like I mentioned, we have extended the census. You can still fill it out until October 31st. And I'm sure we've had lots of babies born from that time. But unfortunately, April 1st is that cutoff date. So if your baby was born April 2nd or after 2020, then they do not get counted. But if it was born April 1st or before 2020, they get counted. The census isn't in my native language. So the Census Bureau did extensive research on this, and the main languages that we found to have a need of interpretation, those are the 12 non-English languages that are available online, over the phone, and then the print questionnaire is available in English and Spanish. If you have a language need outside of that, then there are 60 non-English languages that have glossaries and language guides. And when somebody, if you haven't filled out the census, then when somebody knocks on your door, they will show you that list of languages and you can choose which one you speak, and they will find a translator or help for you in that language. Another scenario, I'm working 2 jobs, I have 3 kids, I just don't have time to fill out the census. I know what it's like to work a full-time job and have kids and have a lot of responsibilities. I hear you. I miss things all the time. I feel like my plates are gonna come crashing down one day, and some of them do. But the census is so important, and it has such an impact for your kids and for your job. You wanna make sure you still have a job in 10 years, and we're using that information to forecast. So if you have to work 2 jobs, because you have to drive to another city for one of those, or your kids are at home and driving you crazy, but you want them to be in after school, those are the kinds of things that are going to be impacted by census. So take 10 minutes today that are going to impact the next 10 years. 10 minutes for 10 years is not a bad trade-off. Another scenario, I don't think anything will happen anyway if I fill it out. It absolutely does. We talked about those $2,000 a person and those services for your community. Every person brings $2,000 to their community a year, and it's going to impact if you have enough funding in that program or if you don't. If you're looking for subsidized housing and you can't find it in the area you live in, it's because people didn't fill out the census. If you're looking for childcare, subsidized childcare, free and reduced lunch, and that community that you live in, there's just there's not enough. They had 20,000 and it's gone, or they had a certain amount and it's gone. And you could be put on a waiting list, but maybe you get it, maybe you don't. So it impacts you in various ways. It's not a direct, nobody's sending you a check like the stimulus. You don't get a check for $2,000, but your community does. And it comes back to you in those services that we mentioned earlier. If you are experiencing homelessness and don't have an address, you can still participate in the census, and we very much want you to, by going online and saying that you are experiencing homelessness and don't have an address, and you'll be able to respond. If you are renting a room and you don't know your tenant's information, have a conversation. Talk with them, decide who is going to fill out the census, or ask, have you already filled out the census? Did you include me? And you know, the worst thing is not to overdo the census. If you have 10 roommates and they all fill out the census and they all put each other's kids' names, and we have too much information, that's a good problem to have. The Census Bureau can sort that stuff out. So when in doubt, over communicate. Give them as much information as possible, and we will sort it out on our end. We're not going to count people 10 times. We have a process to deduplicate on our end. To avoid it, you absolutely should talk to each other, but don't ever worry like, oh, someone probably included him or her, so I'm not going to do it. Go ahead and write them in anyway, and the Census Bureau will figure it out. If you don't want people to come and knock on your door, the easiest thing to do is to fill out the census online or over the phone. There is still a chance that you may have someone knock on your door because of how everything was impacted with COVID. You can open the door and simply tell them you have already filled it out, or you can just ignore them and they eventually will go away. Why does the census matter to me? We've talked about a lot of these reasons, and so I just encourage you to go through them and find out what it is about what I talked about today that matters. It could be funding for your local school. It could be funding for senior services. It could be health insurance, or schools, roads, hospitals. It's different for everyone. I really encourage you to think about it right now, and when you leave this presentation today, that you say, okay, the census matters to me and to my family because of this reason, and this is why I'm going to fill it out. And then if you can take it one step further and post on your social media, that would be even better. You know, increase awareness and tell people, I filled out the census, or the census matters to me because I want better services for my kids, or fill in the blank. Questions. I don't know if I was following along, so maybe Herberto, you can relay if anyone has any questions, or if you thought of something that I didn't cover in this presentation. I'm happy to do that in the next 2 minutes.
I know you mentioned something about people who are counted within the census. What are some examples of people who are not counted within the census?
Everyone living in the United States should be counted. If this is your permanent home, or if you think it's going to be your permanent home, regardless of if you are a citizen, if you're not a citizen, you know, mixed status, whatever. The only people that would not be counted are like people visiting from other countries that are not going to be living here. So if you have your in-laws or grandparents or someone from your native country, or guests from somewhere else, then they would not be counted if they're just staying here temporarily. If they're going home, if they have a permanent, you know, homes elsewhere, then they would not be counted in the census. And also if you have children, but they're living abroad, if they're living in another country for a majority of the year, they don't get counted here either. They're not living here. They're not utilizing the services.
Can you touch a little bit about the college students that live in dorms? How would that be impacted in this case if you have students that are going to college?
Yep, yeah, that's kind of a tricky situation. So typically college students get counted if they live in dorms on campus. Then they get counted by the university. If they live off campus, if they're renting, then they self-respond like everyone else. But if they, like for example, we're going to Sac State, then and they lived in the Sac State dorms, they should have they should be counted by the dorm administrator. What happened with COVID-19 is that colleges shut down and students were sent home. And I realized that they are now living at home or wherever, or even before April 1st, maybe they went home, because I think it was March that colleges closed down. If they would typically, if it was not due to COVID-19, if they were typically would be living in the dorm, then they still get counted on the dorm, in the dorm. Because you have to think about the impact of the census. The funding follows wherever people live. So if they are typically living in the college dorm and receiving services there, using the college, maybe hospital or the hospital there and those roads, then that area needs to get that funding. So you would not, if you have a child at home, you would not fill out the census for them. They would, the college is filling it out, or they're sending a questionnaire with the student, and then the student mails it back to the college and the college submits it. If you have questions, it's kind of tricky. I can't really go over the nuances in just a few minutes. My contact information, I think, is going to be on the next screen. Go ahead and email me or call me, and I'm happy to address that.
And then I have two more questions. One is, for example, for the census, typically I know that they know there's a response rate. How do they go as far as checking in and which individuals have not completed the survey? Or how do we go as far as communicating and contacting, in this case, the non-response rate?
So the Census Bureau has a live self-response mapper, and you can go on and check out your county and see how it's doing, if people are responding. And self-response only measures, people who go online, who fill it out over the phone. The paper questionnaire, it will capture just not non-response follow-up. If someone is coming to your door and knocking and not getting the information that way, it's not captured on self-response. And also, if you live in a rural area, and so it kind of throws it off a little bit if you fall under the operation of update leave. But basically, the self-response tool for your county, if you just go to 2020census.gov, then you will be, I don't have the link here, but look for, it's called Self-Response Mapper, M-A-P-P-E-R, and you will be able to find a link and look up your state, your county, and see how it's doing in relation to, or compared to other cities and counties.
And then one of the last questions I have is, so you mentioned that for the people who like to work for the census have to be at least 18 years old. Would this also qualify for graduating high school seniors who are finishing, say, school and would like to have a summer job?
If they must be 18 to start work. So I told you that the census is going to go through October 31st. So we are now, June? If they're not 18, I would say by the end of June, it would be probably difficult to get employed, because I'm sure that there's other people. I would say that even right now, they should be 18 to start working. In the past, whenever you can apply, even if you were not 18, and your application would become active when you turn 18. So if your birthday is just right around the corner, go ahead and apply. And again, your application will become live and active once you turn 18. And if at that time there is still a need, then they will call you to do the background check and start the employment process. So you know what, go ahead and apply. It doesn't hurt to ask. And here is my contact information. If you have any questions, if anything was unclear, if you'd like me to share the PowerPoint with you or some other information, feel free to call out and ask. If I don't know the answers, I will certainly put you in contact with someone who does. And we have about 9 counterparts to myself in Sacramento County that speak different languages. So if you want information in a different language, also feel free to ask and I will connect you with that person.